Mark Reynolds had no idea that a simple wooden fence would nearly destroy his life. After 10 years of city living, Mark had finally achieved his dream. A cozy home in the quiet suburbs, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac in the pristine Cypress Ridge neighborhood. It was perfect. The kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset and neighbors waved while watering their lawns. It seemed like paradise. At first. 2 weeks after moving in, Mark built a tall, modern cedar fence in his backyard. A sleek design that offered privacy without being an eyesore. His 5-year-old son, Caleb, loved playing in the yard, and Mark wanted to give his family a safe space to enjoy without being under constant watch from the neighboring houses. The fence was finished on a Saturday. On Sunday, the storm began, and it wasn't the weather. At exactly 7:04 a.m., Monday morning, Mark was awakened by the unmistakable blare of police sirens. Groggy and confused, he peered through his bedroom blinds and froze. 2 police cruisers were parked directly in front of his driveway. A third car, unmarked, had just pulled up. Still in his robe, Mark rushed to the door and opened it to find 2 uniformed officers standing on his porch, hands resting on their belts. "Mr. Reynolds?" one of them asked. Yeah, that's me," he said cautiously. "We received an emergency complaint from someone in the area. They claimed your newly constructed fence might be concealing hazardous materials. Possibly even explosives." Mark blinked, sure he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The report was anonymous," the officer added, clearly uncomfortable. "We're required to investigate any threat to public safety." "Explosives?" Mark repeated. "In a backyard fence?" The officer gave a slight shrug. "Mind if we take a look?" Mark opened the side gate and let them walk the perimeter. He kept a cautious distance, trying not to look as shocked as he felt. This had to be a mistake, a joke even, but nothing about the officer's tone seemed humorous. After 15 minutes of walking, scanning, and quietly speaking into their radios, the officers returned. "There's nothing dangerous here," one confirmed. "We'll file this as a false alarm." Mark was about to thank them when the other officer hesitated. "Off the record, you didn't upset anyone on the HOA board, did you?" That question hit harder than it should have. "I don't think so," Mark replied slowly. "I haven't even met anyone from the HOA yet." The officer gave a tight-lipped smile. "You will, and when you do, don't say I didn't warn you." As the cruisers rolled away, Mark stood frozen on his porch, heart still pounding. The absurdity of what just happened felt like something out of a bad sitcom, but something told him it wasn't over. Later that morning, while retrieving his mail, Mark found a folded piece of paper with no envelope. It wasn't typed, it wasn't signed. It read, "Your fence doesn't belong here. Neither do you. Cypress Ridge has rules, and some of us don't need a uniform to enforce them." That night, he stood by the fence, scanning the quiet shadows of his yard, listening to the faint hum of suburban calm. A breeze rustled the tall wooden panels he had, built with his own hands. They looked sturdy, secure, but now they felt more like a wall between him and something unseen. Unbeknownst to Mark, across the street behind parted curtains, someone was watching. Her eyes cold, calculating, and furious. She picked up her phone and made a call. "It's me," she said softly. He didn't listen. "The fence is still up. Time for the next step." Mark didn't have to wait long to meet the neighborhood's most feared figure. The next morning, just after breakfast, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not the friendly kind, but the sort that demanded obedience. When Mark opened it, he came face to face with Karen Whitmore, the infamous president of the Cypress Ridge HOA. She was dressed in a perfectly pressed beige pantsuit, holding a thick binder under one arm and a clipboard in the other. Her short, platinum blonde hair was immaculately styled, and her expression could have soured milk. "Mr. Reynolds," she said curtly, "you and I need to have a serious conversation about your fence." Mark leaned against the doorframe, trying to stay calm. "Morning, you must be from the HOA." "I am the HOA," she corrected, stepping forward without invitation. "And your fence violates multiple community standards: height, color, material, and structural intent. It's disruptive, dangerous, and out of place." Mark raised a brow. "It's wood, it's legal, and I followed city regulations." Nini opened her binder like a trial attorney mid-prosecution. "This neighborhood follows additional standards, ones far more refined than the city's generic building codes. Cypress Ridge is a curated community. Your fence creates division. It's a psychological disruption." Mark stared. "A what?" Karen tapped a specific page with a manicured finger. Section 4.7, subpoint C. "All visual modifications must maintain harmony with surrounding architecture to promote communal cohesion. Your fence is the equivalent of shouting in a library." Behind her, a few neighbors had started to gather on their lawns, pretending to water plants while clearly eavesdropping. "You're making this into something it's not," Mark said, aware of the small audience. "It's just a privacy fence." "To you, maybe," Karen snapped, "but to others it's threatening. It sends a message: stay out. That kind of energy spreads. It's toxic." She reached into her clipboard and pulled out a printed notice, slapping it against his chest. "You have 3 days to remove the structure or face a formal citation and daily fines of $500. Mark stepped back, his temper rising. "You don't get to walk onto my porch and treat me like a criminal for wanting privacy." Karen's eyes narrowed. "People like you think you can just move in and change everything, but not here. Not on my watch." Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and marched down the walkway. Halfway across the lawn, she spun back around. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, her voice sweet and venomous at once. "If you think this is about the fence, you're not paying attention." Then she walked away, as casually as if she'd just borrowed a cup of sugar. Mark stood in the doorway, stunned. The clipboard notice in his hand now felt heavier than it should have. He glanced across the street and saw the curtain in Karen's front window twitch. She was watching again. He slammed the door shut and muttered to himself, "This is insane." That evening, Mark posted about the encounter in the neighborhood's private Facebook group. He kept it polite but factual, describing the visit, the threat, and the absurd accusations about his fence being psychologically disruptive. Within minutes, reactions poured in. Some neighbors supported him. Others stayed silent. But one comment stood out: "Careful. Karen got a veteran evicted last year over a mailbox. This isn't just about fences. It's about power." Later that night, as Mark walked his dog past the quiet row of houses, he noticed something odd. 3 security cameras mounted across Karen's house were now pointed directly at his property. Then, halfway down the block, he noticed a city maintenance worker crouching by the curb. "What's going on?" Mark asked. The man stood up. "Sewer inspection order, Block 14. But there was nothing scheduled. The worker shrugged. "Someone called in a complaint, said your backyard might be leaking contaminants." Mark's blood ran cold. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mark didn't sleep that night. His mind was racing, replaying every word Karen had thrown at him and every unsettling moment since the police visit. He found himself pacing the living room at 2 a.m., staring out through the blinds at Karen's house. Her curtains were drawn, her lights were off, but somehow he knew she was still watching. By morning, Mark made a decision. If Karen wanted a war, he wasn't going to just sit back and surrender. He started asking questions. That afternoon, he visited a few nearby homes, the ones whose porch lights always flickered, whose lawns weren't quite HOA perfect, the ones who didn't wave as enthusiastically during the morning jogs or holiday parades. He started with an older man named Glenn, who lived 2 houses down and seemed friendly enough. "I wouldn't mess with her if I were you," Glenn said, after hearing about the fence situation. Karen's not just the president, she is the HOA. What does that even mean? Mark asked. She rewrote half the bylaws herself over the last 10 years. Board members don't stick around long enough to stop her. They either move, quit, or fall in line. What about the rest of the neighborhood? Glenn gave a dry laugh. Most are scared of her. The few who've tried to fight back, they learned the hard way. Mark frowned. What happened? Security violations, complaints about landscaping, random citations, and one guy. Glenn lowered his voice. His car's brake lines were cut after he filed a lawsuit. Police never proved anything, but everyone knew. Mark left Glenn's porch with a knot in his stomach. He spent the rest of the day walking door to door, gathering more whispers, more half-spoken warnings. People were careful, nervous. Most looked over their shoulders before speaking. She had. My shed condemned after I refused to donate to the HOA picnic, one woman muttered. She had my mailbox measured with a ruler. Said it was 2 inches too tall, said another man. And the worst part? No one had proof. Everything Karen did was cloaked in policy and paperwork. She was smart, too smart. She didn't break the rules. She bent them until they wrapped around her like armor. That evening, Mark sat in his garage going through HOA documents he'd downloaded from the community website. Page after page of rules, amendments, loopholes. And then something caught his eye. Section 12.3, Homeowner Mediation Clause. It was small, buried in legal jargon, but it mentioned something rare, a homeowner referendum. If Mark could get 2/3 of the residents to sign a petition, he could bring a motion before the board to overturn a decision, even a fence removal. There was hope, but Karen wasn't done with him yet. That night, around midnight, Mark's dog began barking furiously. He rushed outside, heart pounding, and nearly tripped over the leash by the porch. But what he saw made his blood run cold. Spray-painted in blood-red letters across the front of his beautiful cedar fence were the words, "You've been warned." Mark's heart hammered in his chest. He grabbed his phone and pulled up his security camera feed. He had installed a front-facing camera last week, just in case. He tapped the video timeline. Nothing. He rewound the footage. Still nothing. The entire night blank. His cameras had been disabled. Shaking with adrenaline and rage, he called the non-emergency police line, but the dispatcher sounded unconvinced. "It's just graffiti, sir. File a report online." As he hung up, Mark noticed something else. A small black object tucked behind his mailbox post. He crouched down and picked it up. A miniature wireless signal jammer. Somebody hadn't just painted his fence. They'd sabotaged his cameras, blocked his signal, and walked right up to his property like they owned it. Mark looked back at Karen's house. Her lights were still off, her curtains still closed, but the game had just escalated. And now he wasn't playing defense anymore. Mark wasn't the type to sit back and get steamrolled, not by bureaucrats and definitely not by someone like Karen Whitmore. That night, after repainting over the red spray, he spent hours reading through Cypress Ridge's HOA bylaws, digging for loopholes, exemptions, or anything that might help him fight back. He found legal jargon, petty rules about bird feeders and curtain colors, and vague threats about neighborhood, uniformity. But then he noticed something odd. Section 12.3 stated that all HOA violation appeals must be reviewed at the next scheduled board meeting, which shall remain open to all residents. The next meeting was tomorrow night. Karen would have no choice but to hear him out. Officially. Or so he thought. At exactly 6:58 p.m. the next day, Mark arrived at the Cypress Ridge Community Hall. The building was small and tidy, with a polished brass plaque that read, "For residents, by residents." But something was wrong. The gate was locked. A man in a blue polo shirt, one of Karen's favorite lapdogs if Mark remembered correctly, stood in front of the door like a bouncer. "Meeting's full," he said flatly. Mark blinked. "It's an open meeting. I'm a resident. You've been flagged for disruptive behavior," the man replied without emotion. "This is a closed session." Mark wasn't about to turn back. He walked around the perimeter until he found a side door partially cracked open. After checking to make sure no one was watching, he slipped inside and crouched behind a supply cabinet near the back. What he heard made his stomach turn. Karen stood at the podium, her voice polished and theatrical. "Neighbors, this is about more than one fence. It's about defending our values. We can't let outsiders bring their urban habits here. Loud cars, barking dogs, surveillance cameras." A few board members murmured in agreement. "His fence is just the start," she continued. "It's a message. I don't need you. And we've seen what happens when people stop caring about community order." She paused for effect. "We all remember the fire on Briarwood Lane. The hoarder who brought rats. This is no different. It always starts with someone who thinks the rules don't apply." Mark's blood boiled. She was comparing him to a hoarder and an arsonist. He pulled out his phone and started recording, audio only, careful not to make a sound. That's when he saw something that froze him in place. Karen's assistant, a quiet man named Alan, stood beside her, holding a tablet. Every so often he'd tap the screen and nod. At first, Mark thought he was taking notes, but then he saw the tablet's screen. It was showing live security feeds. His security feeds, front yard, back fence, driveway, all from angles Mark had, personally installed. Someone had hacked his system. He ducked lower, breath shallow. If they found him, he had no doubt they'd find a way to turn it against him. The meeting ended 20 minutes later, and Mark slipped back out the side door before the crowd dispersed. Back at home, he rushed to check his camera system. The app now asked for a password reset. When he entered his credentials, it rejected them. Access denied. He tried again. Same result. That night, Mark disconnected every camera, removed the Wi-Fi router, and put a sticky note on his fridge that read, "Trust no one on the inside." But the worst wasn't over. The next morning, he received an email from the HOA board. "Due to your repeated refusal to comply and your unauthorized intrusion into last night's confidential meeting, your HOA privileges have been suspended pending review. Fines now total $2,650. Immediate action required." They weren't just fining him now, they were isolating him, making him the enemy. And yet, buried in the email's footer, something caught his eye, a link labeled Appeals Archive. Board History. He clicked it, and there, listed from 2 years ago, was a name, Janice Keller, former board member. Her case file read, "Removed for questioning procedures." He had a new target, someone who might know how to bring Karen down. Janice Keller hadn't been seen around Cypress Ridge in almost 2 years. Her house, tucked away on the quieter side of the neighborhood, had a "For Sale" sign staked in front of it, its edges sun-faded and bent. Mark stood at the edge of her cracked driveway, half expecting no one to answer when he rang the doorbell. But after a moment, the door opened. Cautiously, only a few inches. A woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and graying hair peeked through the gap. "Yes, Ms. Keller?" Mark asked gently. "My name's Mark Reynolds. I live down on Oak Hollow. I need to talk to you about Karen." Janice's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here." "I know, but I think she's targeting me like she did you. Please, just 5 minutes." She hesitated, glancing past him toward the street. Then she opened the door just wide enough to wave him inside. The house was nearly empty. No furniture. Boxes stacked in corners. A single folding chair sat in the center of the living room. Mark realized she hadn't just listed her home. She was running. "I tried to fight her once," Janice said after a long silence. "I was the treasurer on the board. Thought I could bring transparency. I started asking where HOA fees were actually going. That's when it started. Mark leaned forward. What did she do? She accused me of embezzlement, Janice said bitterly. Said I misused funds. I showed them receipts, real ones, but suddenly my bank account had suspicious activity. Someone filed a complaint with the IRS. My car was towed for being abandoned in my own driveway. I lost everything trying to defend myself. She forged it all? Mark asked, shocked. She doesn't need to forge, Janice said. She has people, a web of volunteers and board members who owe her favors, silence, or fear. She never leaves fingerprints. Mark hesitated, then pulled out his phone and played the recording he made during the board meeting. Karen's inflammatory speech, her comparisons, the tablet Alan was holding. Janice's eyes darkened. She has access to your cameras, she whispered. That means she's inside your network. Could be watching you any time. Listening. Mark had thought of that too. He'd disconnected everything, but the feeling of being watched still lingered. I need proof, he said. Something undeniable. Something I can take to the city or the news. Janice bit her lip, thinking. There's one thing, she said slowly. Karen used to keep a personal file. She called it her compliance dossier. Blackmail, dirt, photos. She'd keep tabs on homeowners. Past citations, arguments, even private emails. She once bragged that she had everyone's secrets locked up tighter than City Hall. Where? Mark asked, eyes lighting up. She always carried a silver flash drive, Janice said. Kept it close, but if it's not on her, it might be in her home office. Top floor, front left window. That's where her blinds never open. Mark didn't say anything, but the idea was already forming. Breaking into her house was dangerous, illegal, reckless. But at this point, what else was left? He stood to leave, but Janice grabbed his arm. If you go after her, she'll come at you harder than before. She'll go after your job, your family, your credit, everything. Mark nodded. Let her try. She messed with the wrong man. As he left, Janice handed him an old key fob. Garage opener. Used to be synced with her system back when we were friends. It might still work, just be careful. That night, Mark drove past Karen's house twice, mapping the blind spots. Her motion lights flickered on cue. He spotted 2 cameras on. Her roof, but none facing the rear. At exactly 2:44 a.m., under a cloudy moon, Mark parked 2 blocks away, pulled on gloves, and crept through the side alley toward her back gate. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was it. He clicked the key fob. To his shock, the garage door opened, but inside he didn't find an empty garage. He found something much worse. The garage door creaked open slowly, gears groaning like an old machine reluctant to reveal its secrets. Mark slipped inside, heart pounding like a war drum. The air smelled of motor oil and something faintly metallic. A single overhead bulb flickered above, casting long, warped shadows over Karen's meticulously clean garage floor. And then he saw it. Not a car, not storage boxes. A door, steel, narrow, padlocked, embedded in the far wall behind a row of perfectly stacked recycling bins. This wasn't just a homeowner's workshop or a utility closet. It was reinforced, secret, hidden from anyone glancing in casually. Mark walked toward it slowly. The padlock was heavy-duty but rusted. He fished out a small pry bar from his coat, just in case. One strong yank and a snap. The lock gave way. The door opened with a mechanical hiss. Inside, everything changed. A dim, cold room. Walls covered in shelves, file boxes, and drawers, each meticulously labeled with names, addresses, and HOA lot numbers. Mark stepped forward and ran his finger across a cabinet labeled Disruptives. The drawer slid open to reveal thick manila folders. One name at the front made him freeze. Janice Keller. He flipped through it. Inside were surveillance photos, bank statements, HOA violation notices, all cross-referenced and cataloged. There were notes in Karen's looping handwriting. IRS complaint filed 312. Leverage, possible HOA fund misuse, pursue press angle if needed. It was a war journal, and it wasn't just Janice. The drawer beneath it read, Glenn Rowley, Lot 22. Another, Tamara Gibson, Lot 39. Each file held similar pages of dirt, threats, carefully timed anonymous complaints, even screenshots of emails, some clearly hacked. He opened another folder, and there it was. Mark Reynolds, Lot 47. His stomach twisted. His own folder was thinner, but still damning. Copies of his fence approval request, time-stamped neighborhood forum. Posts, a photo of him talking to Glenn on the lawn. Even his Amazon orders. One note at the bottom. Watch for escalation. If he contacts press, initiate Phase 2. Phase 2. He scanned the rest of the room. A corkboard on the far wall had a map of the neighborhood. Pins, strings, arrows. At the center was Karen's house, a spider at the center of a web. But in red ink, something caught his eye. Operation Restoration, July 12th. Today was June 23rd. He took out his phone and snapped photos of everything. The folders, the corkboard, the file labeled Restoration. He pulled open a final drawer marked Legal, hoping for a smoking eye. Gun. Inside was a small silver flash drive tucked inside an envelope labeled Failsafe. This was it. Just as he reached for it, the garage light clicked off. The silence was deafening. Mark froze. Every breath was thunder in the dark. A voice echoed from the shadows near the open garage door. You really should have listened. Karen turned slowly. She stood in the doorway wearing a long gray robe, hair wrapped in a towel, calm as ever. But her eyes were ice. I gave you every chance to back off, she said. But you just couldn't help yourself. Mark held the flash drive tight. You've been blackmailing half the neighborhood. Karen smiled faintly. I've been protecting it. From chaos. From people like you who don't respect order. Idam took a step closer. You think that little USB will save you? Go ahead, show it to the city. Do you know who sits on the review board? My cousin, and her husband's firm does IT security for the council. Mark's mind raced. She had layers, connections, safety nets. But here's the real twist, Mark, she said, voice dripping venom. You're already trespassing, and thanks to my real-time surveillance, your little break-in is already being streamed. Live. His heart stopped. Karen lifted her phone. Sure enough, the camera feed showed Mark inside the locked room. A digital timestamp. Geotagged. Evidence. She stepped forward, grinning like a queen who had just checkmated her final pawn. This isn't a story about you taking down the villain, she whispered. It's about the neighborhood swallowing you whole. For a full second, Mark stood frozen. The glowing screen in Karen's hand showing his face inside her secret room, time-stamped and damning. He gripped the flash drive like a lifeline as her words echoed around him. Trespassing. Theft. Illegal. Surveillance. She ticked the charges off one by one, her voice calm and deliberate. This will bury you. But then something unexpected happened. A click behind Karen. A garage light switched back on. Karen's smile flickered. Standing in the shadows behind her was someone else. Alan, her quiet assistant from the HOA board. Alan, Karen said sharply without turning around. Call the police, now. But Alan didn't move. I saw the footage, he said, voice low. All of it. What you said about Janice. The things you did to Glenn. Karen turned toward him slowly, her calm cracking ever so slightly. Alan, you've misunderstood. That data is private. You shouldn't. I made backups. Alan interrupted. "Everything in that room was auto-synced to your cloud. I've had access for months. I only stayed quiet because I didn't know how deep it went." Mark's eyes widened. Karen stepped toward Alan like she might strangle him herself. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've done what no one else had the guts to," he snapped. "I copied everything tonight. Every folder, every file. I emailed it to multiple sources. The local paper, a consumer watchdog, group, and even the state attorney's office. If anything happens to Mark or me, they'll know exactly where to look." Karen's face collapsed into a quiet, seething rage. For a moment, the garage was completely silent. Then Mark moved fast. He darted out of the hidden room, shoved past Karen, and bolted toward the driveway. She shouted something, but Alan held. Her back just long enough for Mark to escape into the night, flash drive clenched in his fist. Outside, the cool air hit him like a wave. Mark sprinted to his car 2 blocks away, started the engine, and peeled off toward Janice's house. His thoughts were racing. The footage was out. Karen was cornered. But he knew her well enough now to know. She wouldn't go down quietly. By the time he reached Janice's home, she was already at the door. "You look like hell," she said, ushering him inside. "I have the drive," Mark said breathlessly, and Alan's turned. Janice looked shocked. "That's the first smart thing he's done in years." They plugged in the flash drive and began sorting through its contents. There were hundreds of files, recordings of HOA meetings that had been marked off the record, entire spreadsheets tracking homeowners' private data, even flagged browser histories, most of which had clearly been stolen through spyware. But the biggest shock came when Janice opened one folder titled Restoration Initiative. Inside was a presentation, 14 slides detailing a multi-phase plan, forced citations, escalating fines, lien placements, and eventual foreclosure, all against non-compliant homeowners. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were trying to seize homes. Janice's hands trembled. She's weaponizing the HOA to take properties, under market value, then reselling them through shell buyers connected to her cousin's firm. Mark read the timeline. Operation Restoration. Phase 1, July 12th, Target Homes, 9. He counted the lot numbers. One was his. "This isn't petty power," he muttered. "It's real estate theft." They had everything now, motive, evidence, witnesses, but time was running out. Janice took a deep breath. "We need to get ahead of her before she spins. This. HOA elections are in 3 days. If we call a town hall and show them this..." "She'll fight it," Mark said. "Legally, dirty. She'll drag us through the mud." Janice nodded. "That's why we don't just show them slides." She turned her laptop around, revealing a Zoom call already in progress. On the screen were 3 people, local journalists and a district legal investigator. She'd contacted them earlier. "You ready to blow this wide open?" Janice asked. Mark clenched his fists, nodded once. "Let's take our neighborhood back." 3 days later, the Cypress Ridge Community Center was packed wall to wall. Every folding chair was taken, the air buzzing with whispers. Cameras from 2 local news stations had set up in the back. Neighbors who hadn't shown up to HOA meetings in years were now leaning forward, eager for answers. Karen stood at the front of the room behind the podium, her perfectly pressed blazer and tightly curled hair immaculate as always. Her smile was thin and sharp, but her eyes were scanning the room like a hawk watching prey. "This meeting," she began smoothly, "is to address the recent surge in disinformation about our board and its leadership. Let me reassure you, the HOA has always acted in the best interest of our beautiful community." The murmurs grew louder. Mark stood near the side wall, flash drive in pocket, watching her perform. She was doing what she did best, controlling the narrative. But this time, she wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Janice stepped forward next. The crowd shifted, many whispering in recognition. The woman who had vanished after Karen drove her out. But today, she looked like someone who had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. "I was the treasurer of this HOA 2 years ago," Janice began, "and I was targeted when I questioned financial discrepancies. I lost everything, but I wasn't the only one." She turned to Mark and nodded. He walked forward and placed a laptop on the main table. With a click, the projector behind him lit up the wall. The first slide, Operation Restoration. The room gasped. Mark spoke clearly, letting each word hit with precision. "This is Karen's plan: to fine, punish, and force out 9 homeowners, all so their properties could be foreclosed and quietly sold through shell buyers tied to her cousin's real estate firm." Whispers turned to shouts. Several board members turned pale. "She hacked our cameras, emails, even our bank accounts," Janice added. "We have evidence of blackmail, planted violations, and illegal surveillance, all stored in a digital dossier she's maintained for years." Someone stood from the crowd. It was Glenn Rowley, one of the earlier targets. "I lost my job because of a city complaint she made. I thought it was random. It wasn't." Another voice rose. "She tried to put a lien on my house for painting. My porch the wrong shade of beige." Mark clicked again, and up came hidden recordings, photos, bank transfers. The media filmed everything. Karen stood frozen, jaw tight, her lips twitching. But then she slammed her hand on the podium. "All of this is fabricated," she snapped. "This is slander. That flash drive could have been tampered with. You think people like them can be trusted with our community's future?" She pointed at Janice, then Mark. "You're being manipulated by bitter failures." But the room had turned. One by one, homeowners stood up, shouting questions, citing personal stories, calling for her removal. Then Alan walked to the microphone. "Resigning from the board," he said simply, "because I saw what she did and stayed silent too long. But not anymore. I've submitted my full statement and digital logs to the state attorney's office. As of this morning, a formal investigation into Karen is underway." Karen's face turned to ash. 2 uniformed officers entered the building quietly through the back. Karen noticed them and took a step back. "This is harassment," she hissed. "I built this neighborhood. You're all ungrateful little—" "Karen Whitmore," the officer interrupted. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, illegal surveillance, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, and obstruction of justice." The room fell silent. As the cuffs clicked shut, Karen's final words hissed out like steam escaping a pressure. "Valve, you think this ends with me?" They let her out. The meeting adjourned with cheering, tears, and long-held sighs of relief. Mark stood outside as the sun set, Janice beside him. "So, think they'll finally approve your fence?" she asked with a grin. Mark laughed. "At this point, I'm building a patio too." But just before they walked off, Alan approached one last time. "There's something you should know," he said, holding out a second flash drive. "What's this?" Mark asked. Alan hesitated. "Karen wasn't the only one running files. There's someone else, someone higher. She called him the chairman. She was just—" "The front." Mark's smile faded. The victory was real, but the war might just be beginning.